Welcome everyone. We're excited to share some country wisdom with you.
King Solomon had a thing or two to say about the path to wisdom. In Proverbs 4, he wrote, "Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. Keep straight the path of your feet, and all your ways will be sure."
Join us now for Country Wisdom.
Well, we've got the cameras ready, and we're here.
Yeah, well, and it's, it should be about time. You're looking for an interviewee, huh?
Yeah, you said she was coming.
Well, actually, she's already here. It's you today. I know this is kind of pulling a little fast one on you, but it's...
You could have warned me.
Yeah, go ahead and sit in the hot seat, and I'll tell you what the topic is in a minute, okay?
Oh, this is fun.
Hey, you look pretty good over there.
Oh, this is a little different. It's not different that I look good. It's just different being over here.
Okay, touche. No, I wanted you over there today because I want to interview you.
But you already have.
Well, this is a totally different
We did
subject.
my testimony, and I don't know what else I can come up with for you.
Well, let me give you an idea. For years, you've been studying the women of God in the Bible. And you've gone to great depths to look at them and then portray them to audiences in many places. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of want to ask you, what, first of all, gave you that idea to do that?
Well, actually, it was helping a classmate of my son's. She did not belong to the same church, but she was going to a youth conference, and you could get scholarships to Christian colleges. And she said, "I can't sing, I can't preach. You've got 10 minutes, that you can do something." She goes, "But they do have where you can use other mediums." And she goes, "I would like to portray Noah's wife. I want to tell the story of the flood and what it might have really been like for her. Think about it a different way." And I was intrigued by that. And so I said, "Sure." And I studied a little, wrote it, and I realized it was so hard to pack that story into 10 minutes. That was the hard part. But we did it, and she did win a scholarship. And I thought, I've got to redo that whole thing and put in all the parts that I couldn't get in 10 minutes. And so I wrote the fuller length, closer to 30-minute version. And honestly, I thought, I'm going to do this for my own congregation, and that'll be it. But other people heard of it, so you get invited to another church or a school or a women's, Christian women's function.
Now, I may be a little, not watching every preacher out there, but it's very seldom that preachers talk about the mighty women and the great women of the Bible.
Oh, when I was in high school...
You're clenching your jaw.
I am clenching my jaw at the memory. It used to just drive me crazy because you would read, for instance, about the Exodus, and in Scripture it says, it actually tells you how many men there were, how many donkeys they had, how many camels, how many this, and then you'd get this little line at the end, plus women and children. And the early feminist in me would that just bothered me.
Now, you really don't fit a feminist mold. But
okay, no, this was the 70s, all right, but it just bothered me, and it bothered me how many women that are mentioned in the Bible aren't even given a name. Noah's wife, that's all we know. She went through everything that he did and doesn't even get, her name in the credits. But I began, I never quite gave up on God. I just had a chip on my shoulder, a little bit angry. But then you run across stories. I remember distinctly, still in high school, and I ran across the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, which is not one of the big stories in the Bible. Most people, if you mention it, they go, "Zalapha who? Falafel who?" Yeah. These 5 young women went to Moses, and they said, "Look, our father died in the wilderness, He doesn't have any sons. He's got us. We were the ones who worked the land, who took care of property, but we can't inherit. We're just going to lose everything that belonged to our father, and that's not fair. And I fully expected the first time I was reading that, going, you're just going to have to marry someone because that's your only salvation. Moses, to his credit, though, didn't just say, don't be ridiculous, you're female. He said, let me go ask God about it. And for me, it was like, well, isn't that what we should do with every decision that we have?
Amen. Amen.
But it impressed me that Moses didn't just simply dismiss them. And God said, yeah, they're right. And so the rule after that was women could inherit if there was no brother or uncle. It wasn't completely what we would call fair, but it was sure a big step toward it. They just, if they married, couldn't marry outside the tribe because you didn't want one tribe's land going to another tribe. Yeah. But that was a huge step. And in my mind, I remember distinctly thinking, well, maybe God doesn't just dismiss females as being, they're just little appendages attached to a man if they're lucky. And it began to change my attitude toward God and toward some of the patriarchs that I would have thought were just, misogynistic jerks.
I'm not even going to go there, but
let's not.
Let's fast forward a little bit. As you give me an idea before we name some of the women, give me an idea how you prepare for, to do this portrayal. You've done many, but how do you dig into it? Give us an idea.
First place I go is scripture. You might think you know a story, but when you're really studying the story, things will jump out at you that you missed. In fact, that's one reason I do this, because a lot of these stories, whether they involve women or not, even people who aren't particularly gung-ho Christians, go to church all the time, they'll know the story of Noah or Daniel and the lion's den or Jonah, some of those biggies, but our mental image of those stories is kind of like these cute little pictures in a children's storybook. One-dimensional, and we do a disservice when we think, oh yeah, I know that story, I learned it when I was a kid. You go in and you really put yourself in their shoes, literally, or trying to mentally do that. I also love history. I might have mentioned that on an episode or two. And so I'll begin to study, what do we know about that time period? Because
you're going to immerse yourself into the culture
right.
of the time.
I don't want to do what, there's a whole genre of historical novels, which I don't touch. But it's like all they've done is taken a modern woman and dressed her in a Tudor costume and then called this a historical novel. But all of her thoughts, everything that's happening to her is completely like, oh yeah, that's me, just in a pretty costume.
I can tell that even the way you're portraying that at the moment, it's kind of repugnant to you.
It is,
yeah.
It is. But first and foremost, I go by scripture because I don't want to just be inserting my ideas in there. And then I start studying historical records from the period. And it's incredible some of the things you can find. I was asked to do the story of Daniel and his 3 friends. And I'm a decent actress, but I can't portray Daniel. You'd never believe it, no matter how big a beard I stuck on myself. And so I do it from the perspective of a Babylonian woman who is there on the plains of Dura. In fact, I made her the wife of someone who had been teaching these Hebrews and had been quite miffed that he could tell they didn't quite believe it. They were learning the things, they were doing better than everybody else, but he hadn't truly convinced them of, the arts he was trying to teach them. And what it would be like to be on the plains of Dura, see what these young men did.
You've kind of touched on it a little bit. Go ahead, if you would, take a couple minutes here and dig in a little deeper into her character, of what it was like, and maybe portray just a teeny bit of it.
Well, you imagine the jealousy that these Hebrews inspired. We know that Daniel inspired jealousy. That's why they set him up in the trap of convincing the king to make a law where for 30 days people can only pray to you. because they knew exactly that Daniel wouldn't do it. In the story of the fiery furnace, we don't even know where Daniel was. There's speculation that God may have simply given him the stomach flu, 24-hour flu. It may be that Nebuchadnezzar knew Daniel's not going to go for this. We'll send him on a little diplomatic mission.
It's interesting, I heard one preacher call some of these things white space. It's like you're reading along in the Bible and then it just quits. There's no more,
And what I do is have to fill that in, but within the context of the times that they were in, and like I said, not just putting well, wouldn't it be fun if we had her do this? You can't just put your own fiction in there. You're simply trying to fill in some of that white space and make people think about the story in a different way, because stories reach people where sermons can't.
Hi, I'm Steve Hicks, Director of Podcast Ministries for Talking Donkey International, and I'm inviting you to join us for our new daily podcast, Monday through Friday, called Something's Happening Here. I need you to go to the website that's on your screen right now. That's the Something's Happening Here Facebook page. Like that page. That will make you a follower of it, and you will get all of our content as we create it. I look forward to seeing you there. God bless.
When I got to the well that day, I realized I wasn't alone. There was a man sitting on the curbstone of the well. He was obviously exhausted and looked almost as miserable as I felt. And I might have felt some pity for him if he hadn't also obviously been Jewish. The weave of his tunic was definitely Galilean. Where had he even come from? Most Jews do anything they can to stay out of Samaria, which is fine by us.
Please help Talking Donkey produce this important project. To support the Women of God project, go to talkingdonkeyinternational.org and click on the donate button. That's talkingdonkeyinternational.org.
I noticed you've done, matter of fact, Terry and I, when my wife and I first kind of noticed you doing a program someplace, and that really touched our hearts, from a biblical standpoint, from knowing God better. And we thought, we need to, see more of Janice and talk with her more. And well, here you are now, with the ministry. And we've got a lot more I'll share shortly about that. But you come at it from a standpoint of how can this character touch the people in the audience so they draw closer to God. It has nothing to do with you. You're portraying this person to help them live closer to God.
Let's look at Rahab. She's, again, one of my favorites. I have people ask me, which one is your favorite? Because I think at this point I do 14 or 15 different women. And usually my favorite is whoever I'm just now working on or have just finished. It's like, there's your newest baby. Rahab. I love the story of Jericho. Who doesn't know? That's one of those, you almost think of it in the terms of a children's story. You've got the children's song about, well, I guess it's not children's, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, we all know about the walls falling down. When I got to studying and actually reading archaeologists' reports who have worked in Jericho, it's like right down the line at supporting the whole biblical story.
Yes.
It's giving you even more reason to trust God, because when he says something like, two little texts, one refers to Rahab living on the wall and one says in the wall, and that's kind of weird, lived in the wall. Well, it turns out those walls of Jericho, and there were 3, 6 feet thick, and they had hollow pockets. It wasn't solid brick. Well, in between, in those hollow spaces, people literally would build their homes right up against the wall. They found them in the archaeology because one wall was already there. So poorer people would build against the wall, and you could actually look over the wall from the top of the roof. And they would break through and be able to use that pocket for storage or, sleeping, stuff the kids in there or whatever. So she literally did live in the wall. and probably had slits, like we think of for archers in those pockets, so that she could watch, because we know she saw those spies approaching. So I'm researching this story and trying to put myself in her place. I don't know why I'd never noticed it before. Why did God send those spies? You know, it's a divine appointment that she saw them. She recognized, probably because she was a good judge of the average male and the travelers, and she's looking for who might want to stay here and have a good time. So we know it was a divine appointment. Why did God impress Joshua to send spies? You might think, well, to judge just how big those walls are, you know, they never had to touch the walls. So Joshua didn't need to know how thick the walls were. You might be thinking, well, trying to figure out how many soldiers are in the city that we might run up against. Well, they never had to fight, and God knew they weren't going to have to fight. They weren't trying to figure out how much grain do they have, how much water, because Jericho, actually, they've discovered, could have withheld a siege for a year or more, because they had enough grain in the city, and they had springs of water inside the walls that never ran dry. And you realize that whole setup was just for Rahab. And when you think, God put that whole plan in motion for one person who just barely even knew who he was.
Who happened to be a prostitute.
Yeah, you know, she was an innkeeper. Some translations say innkeeper, but back then, you know, yeah, you can, you know, you get a meal, you can sleep on the floor, we'll provide a mat, but for a few extra coins, there were extra services, so it was a little of both. But the fact that you take this person in this completely pagan culture, who somehow there was something in her, stories that they knew, because they were terrified of the Israelites. They knew how God brought them out of Egypt.
Matter of fact, in Joshua chapter 2, she goes to the spies and said, your God who parted the seas and killed the other kings, you know, this God, our hearts did quake, our hearts did melt.
There was something in her that recognized, your God is the one I want. But, I mean, how big could her faith have been? How much could she possibly have really known about Yahweh? Not much. And yet God responded to that with this whole plan with spies and everything that was completely unnecessary. And you think, what would he do to rescue me? Look at what the trouble he went to rescue Rahab, who was not a fine, upstanding, you know, deaconess in her church. And that just hit me. It's like how precious each one of us are. And so any young woman who sees my portrayal, who watches, who listens to that story, and at the end where I talk about that, what would he do to rescue you? That's what I want them to walk away with, is thinking, I am so precious that he would do anything to get to me.
I almost feel like that should be the end of the interview and we have a call, but
I find that in every woman. Peter's mother-in-law, 2 verses in the whole Bible. Peter says she's sick. All we know is she had a fever of some kind. Jesus healed her, and she got up and started cooking for everyone. And that's it. That's all we know. And one day I was thinking about her, because I thought, boy, you just couldn't be the same after that, could you? We don't know if she actually was a full believer or if she thought her son-in-law was just crazy. He'd given up a good job, walked off the job to join some crazy cult. And so I put her in a modern setting because I could picture her as this, you know, East Coast Jewish woman with this jerk of a son-in-law, you know, going, what scheme is he coming up with now? But you cannot encounter Christ. You can't have Christ reach out his hand and, you know, heal you, feel that healing within you, and be the same person, could you?
What's so amazing about your portrayals and the women you've picked throughout the Bible is, I think right now in this age we live in, we see women have got to take this whole other role. They've got to be masculine. They've got to be this way or that way. But the Bible lays out these women as grabbing a hold of God, and God lifts them up into incredible ministries, into touching so many people. Their influence becomes so wide simply because they submitted and trusted God.
Look at Lydia. Lydia was a businesswoman. We clearly know she had smarts because she was running a business, and it was a high end, I suppose kind of like today a Wall Street trader, because it says, a dealer in purple, but I love studying about what went into making that purple cloth and who could afford it. So she had a very upper end studio, if you will. And here she is, for some reason. She's not Jewish, but she's meeting with the Jewish believers about a mile out of town where the river went by, because all Jewish congregations met where there was water. And what did Lydia do? She listens to Paul, she accepts Christ and goes, look, there's water right here, let's baptize, and her whole household. And imagine all of her clients, how many ripples went out from that.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of ripples, we've got an incredible project that you're the major player in this project, and that's creating a series, Women of God. Many of these women, we want to do them in a spectacular fashion to attract hearts and lives. But we've already started in a smaller way, and one of those was Lot's wife. Tell
She's
us quickly.
another one that I do modern.
We don't have a lot of time left in the interview. Tell us a little bit about Lot's wife. We've got that one, as they say, in the can. We've got that one filmed.
I also put modern because, quite frankly, I kind of related to her. We think of her as one of the, bad girls of the Bible. I read a book that she was in, that she was one of the bad girls of the Bible. But when I read her story, what I was struck with was, I literally, but for the grace of God, I could so easily be her.
I mean, cell phone glued to your ear, nice home.
Yes, and not doing anything bad. Probably she was her husband was influential, we know, so she probably was too, probably entertaining important people in town and people traveling through, but her focus just wasn't where it should have been. It was too focused on her little life, and it was scary when I really read her, and could put myself in her shoes quite easy. I could step into those, kitten heel pumps really easily. And that's how I wrote her. Not a bad woman, just someone whose focus was here and not there.
A little off, yeah. Well, I think, like I say, I believe you did an incredible portrayal of her, and it leaves you, when you leave that last scene and you're saying, I won't look back. And then the last second you turn around and you look back. And all of a sudden it leaves you like, is that me? And
I did it because I felt like that was me too much of the time. I mean, I have moments where I rise above and listen to God and all, but too much of my life is spent thinking about my life.
Now,
it's
right
easy
now,
to do.
We have that episode posted on talkingdonkeyinternational.org. Folks can go there and watch it, but there is more to come, and one of them I'm excited about is we recently filmed in Kentucky at the replica of Noah's Ark, and we had Mrs.
You
Noah.
cannot get a better backdrop than an ark.
A 510-foot
right,
ark.
Right. Oh, and they were so delightful to work with, and as you know, because you were there, being able to film from an angle, where the public isn't allowed, but you've got it looming in the background, because we were back in an area that's more of a little service road. And I thought, it's an incredible story that I tell. It's an incredible story in the scriptures, but visually, to have the ark looming over you just makes it so much more real. And it's no longer that little one-dimensional nursery story.
Yeah, I can never look at my Bible in Genesis again and think about the ark the way it used to be, like, say, one-dimensional. Here it is,
And you say that, and it reminds me, when I have been invited to different churches or schools, the nicest thing, the best thing that people can say to me, and I get it a lot, is people who come up and say, I'll never think about that story the same again, because we shouldn't think about them the same.
One of the things that I'm going to tell on Terry, who's filming this, I think he got tears in his eyes, and we all choked up a little bit when you got to that moment talking about the people outside of the ark in the storm, and had you said and done everything you could.
And feeling like, what else could I have done?
What, somebody sound like they ran into somebody there. But
as long as they don't come punching
go.
through the trees this direction, we're good. Yeah, because I fully believe, as I wrap her up, that there's another storm coming. And are we going to be any more prepared for that storm than the majority of people were prepared for the literal storm there?
In about the last minute, really, Janet, kind of tell us what we're looking forward to, what the ministry wants to do and produce this package of women of God.
Well, I'm ready and willing, and the crew is too. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it'll be in God's time and with God's provision, because you can't film these for free, especially if you want to put the different women in settings that truly at least look biblical. Our ultimate goal would be to go to places like Morocco, where a lot of big biblical movies are filmed.
Most of the Jesus movies now are filmed in Morocco.
Right, so that you can get lost in it and not feel like, oh yeah, they're just filming against a little ticky-tacky backdrop, because that takes away from the story. And since I can't get, to everywhere, if we could get these all on DVD.
The other exciting thing to me, and we kind of got to wrap up here, I'm sorry, but you're on that side now, so
right,
but,
you're in charge.
But we want to do a women's Bible study to tie into it specifically of the greatness of these women because of God. And folks, I want to ask you, if you might be touched by this, if you'd like to financially help out. If you do, simply go to talkingdonkeyinternational.org or give us a call, and we're happy to talk with you more about the project, and we're looking forward actually to seeing you doing those different women in that project, because I know it's going to change heart and lives.
That's the point. My grandmother was number 11 in a family of 13 girls, and she sometimes felt lost in the crowd. Do you ever feel that way? But there is someone who notices. If you'd like proof, go to talkingdonkeyinternational.org and request offer number 130 for this free pamphlet, There's Not Another You.
Thank you for watching. Join us again for another exciting Country Wisdom.
See you next time.